also value the questions that you all asked. So that has set up the framework, and now we're going to hear from people that actually do this on a daily basis. And I really commend the planning team for putting together this particular panel because you'll have lots of different perspectives. I also look amongst the room, and I know that you all have your own expertise in some of these initiatives and thoughts and land use, and I encourage you to share as resources. And Jeanette, thank you for staying as a resource to this next part of the conversation. We're going to ask some prepared questions for about 30 minutes, and I think we're going to start at the 50,000 foot level. I'll tell you, that's where I think this conversation should kick off, and then as we get after about 25 minutes or so, we will turn the floor over to you until 11:30. Does that sound good? Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, let me take a minute and just introduce to you the folks that are right in front of you here. On my immediate right is John Kenny, who is a shareholder at Bean, Kenny & Corman. And his area of specialty is land use and zoning, real estate, estate planning, and wealth management. So John also is well known in our community for being an advocate for and working with nonprofits and affordable housing, specifically in that nonprofit area. And so because John has lived in Arlington for so many years, his passion comes through in both his professional life and in his volunteer time. And that's a gift. That's a gift to our community, one that we really appreciate, John, that you do. So he puts his volunteer time where his expertise is. What that also affords us as a community is his relationships that he's developed over these many years, relationships with our citizens as well as with our county government. And that has served us well. So John, we're very appreciative to have you here today. Just to John's immediate right is Matt Ginnivan, did I pronounce it correctly, Matt? And it's my pleasure to meet Matt today and get to know him a little bit more. He is with JVG. And as you all know, JVG very much cares about the Arlington community. And as a development manager here, he has focused his attention most recently in the Roslyn area, working with JVG building Central Place, right?
Yep.
And before that, he was with FBR Capital Markets. So he has that background in economics and politics that truly will help be an anchoring piece to this meeting here. Thank you for being here this morning, Matt. And then to Matt's right is Brian Skull. So Brian is a principal with the Shushan Company. And he has been with them for several years. What I'd like you to know about Brian is his architectural background has been invaluable to Shushan. Prior to this point, he has been responsible for about well over $1 million worth of commercially developed space. So if you guys know, well over, if you all know the development where DARPA is, you all right by Boston Mall, Liberty Square, right?
I'm lucky you. Okay.
Brian, Liberty Center, spent 12 years of his life working on that. And we appreciate it because it allowed us to retain some of our anchoring pieces to Arlington's community, like DARPA, where the internet was born. That is still under development, and if you all haven't seen it, it's a magnificent addition to Arlington's fabric in our community. He's also looking forward and responsible for about the same amount as Shushan is working with Marymount to redevelop the Blue Goose on the corner. So Brian, thank you for your service in your professional life. Sorry?
Quick clarification, you said $1 million worth of real estate. It's about
Thank
1 million square feet of real estate.
Thank you,
Well,
that
another
certainly
million coming
helps.
on in that
Yes, well over $1 million if you're doing the numbers there.
That gets into the
Yeah,
numbers.
thank, no, it does, it does. Thank you. No. So what I really appreciate though about Brian, as we mentioned with others on our panel, is that they take their professional skills and then use them in the community. I am very proud that Brian is a member of Leadership Arlington's class of 2009, serves on my board, and as of July 1st will be my chairman. And I thank you very much for that, Brian. So your panel is before you, and we're going to immediately jump into the questions. And at any point, if you all need to correct me, please do. And I thank you for that, because I'm certainly not the expert in this field. Let's start with sort of the community vision. So I'd like to know from each of you, why does it matter if this group is creating a vision that's forward-looking, and how does that entice development and redevelopment? And John, maybe you want to start with that?
guess I would go back historically, and when the metro came into the RB corridor, for example, and the forward thinking that the county board had done before that to really deal with the transition from single-family neighborhoods to townhouse developments to the high-rise and such as that. And they set out a, very forward-thinking for the time plan. And not only did it guide development, but it also gave the community a sense of where things, these were the parameters, these were the, the boundaries and stuff like that. And the development community will react to that type of plan because they feel that it's more certain that if there's a plan in place, they feel that they can take the risk economically to go forward rather than just trying to develop something. From the community point of view, the plan in place is better, I would argue very strongly, than the piecemeal development that will come along inevitably. It's just a question of when it will come.
So it sort of gets everybody on the same sheet of music, right? Yeah, yeah.
I'll expand,
Go ahead,
expand
Brian.
on that a little bit. I think what I've noticed in the 15 years of going through the public process and getting projects approved, one of the most valuable things that community groups do is to establish a single voice, vet the process early, so that when you come to a public hearing or a planning session such as this, that there is a commonality of thought. One of the things we run up against most often and have trouble with is when you get into a public setting, you get divergent views, and you're trying to resolve things at a public hearing. It's very difficult to do. So I think that single component is very important for a community organization.
And yeah, I think I would just add that the forward-looking vision is really critical, particularly for Lee Highway, where right now you can do a service center or a gas station by right, and I think there's a general consensus that there is a model that should grow and evolve into. But if the community establishes that framework in advance and clearly articulates what that model should look like, it then makes it a lot easier for development and investors to say, okay, we understand what's going to be allowed and encouraged here, versus us being the ones who are sort of forcing the issue and then feeling like it's a combative role as opposed to us coming in and sort of fulfilling the community's vision for that.
That makes sense. So let me just jump off that right there, your comment, Matt. And so if this community values a walkable community, sort of tell me more about what that means. How do they know? Here you are looking at this space as possible redevelopment. What does that mean if they tell you they value a walkable community?
I think there are a number of elements that most people are probably familiar with, but that I think really distinguish that transition from an auto-centric and auto-oriented development to a more pedestrian-friendly one. And I think clearly, and I know this is always going to be a challenge for us, given that it's a VDOT-owned road, but taking back some of that road space. You can think about the spots of Lee Highway that feel generally good today, and they're the narrower spots. They're the spots with bulb outs. You think about Cherrydale. Some of those intersections, they feel pretty good. They feel like you're not scared to walk across them. But then there are the parts where you start getting into the 6-lane superhighway, and you feel like you got to sprint across, and you're sorry that you ever ventured into this auto world. So I think that's one of the key challenges that we're going to face is how do we work with VDOT to take back some of that road, whether that's narrowing the lanes, whether that's adding street parking, and then I think the streetscape elements that are really critical are street trees. I think that's one that just having that buffer between the road and the sidewalk, as well as just enhancing that environment. And then I think the other critical one is sidewalks that are the right width, and that doesn't mean 20-foot wide empty sidewalks, and that doesn't mean 4-foot single file sidewalks. But there's a width that's the right width somewhere in between there, and I think it will vary by setting. But I think a lot of times, an instinct to have too much of a setback because, well, we want to make it grand and this and that, well, that just makes the cars feel like they are on the highway, but there's nothing there. I think it's really important to bring those building faces, up to the sidewalk, and to, on Lee Highway, not have setbacks. I think the setbacks and the tapering are kind of probably more appropriate for the backs of the buildings. But on Lee Highway, I think we want to create more of an urban form that kind of says to drivers, this is a place. This isn't a third, this isn't a place that you drive to, this is a place that you come and you walk.
So creating sense of place. Through those
Huge,
means,
yeah.
right?
And those are three very kind of high-level basic ones. I think as you get into specific locations, there's always going to be different elements that you're going to want to incorporate, and those might be tenant-specific or use-specific, but those are some, I think, big macro ones that should kind of be involved in any plan.
Ryan, how about from Shishans?
One of the things that occurred to me as far as walkability is Lee Highway having been planned as a highway is very difficult to walk along, but the traffic coming from the neighborhoods down to Lee Highway should be recognized in any planning effort. So where these nodes of people that gather on the side road and come down to the pike or the highway, as it is, in addition with clearly the road section doesn't promote any type of walkability. So that's a big issue. That's the one that goes to the state and the other things. But thinking about getting in from the neighborhoods onto the pike is as important as thinking about what's going on along the pike.
And I would add to that, that's a great point in terms of every time that we can get not just getting onto Lee Highway, but getting through.
Sure.
Every time that that a neighborhood road kind of lacerates Lee Highway, and starts to break it into more of a grid, I think there's sometimes can tend to be a fear of, well, then everyone's going to use me as a cut through to get onto Lee Highway. But I think it's actually kind of the opposite. Those roads are neighborhood serving. The major thoroughfare is going to be Lee Highway. And the question is just, to get to the other side of the street, do you have to take a right turn onto Lee Highway, go up 4 blocks, take a left turn, circle back around, or can you cut across, because that's a true now urban intersection.
That's one of the reasons why we've included the arterial neighborhoods in this initiative. And that's why when we started this, we wanted to make sure that we weren't just having a dialogue with the folks who live on Lee Highway, and you see that we have representatives from other neighborhoods because the arterial neighborhoods are the people who use Lee Highway every day. So.
Yeah, that's great, Angie, thank you. And also, I'd like to point out that behind you, we have maps of this area too. You all are probably familiar with that, but this is for your reference also. Yeah, thank you. Brian, go ahead.
That's a great comment about those who live on Lee Highway. Very few people live on Lee Highway.
That's right.
The sections that you're worried about redeveloping. So that brings up the whole, in a walkable sense, who's going to be walking there? If you can bring residential development to Lee Highway, which is currently not zoned for, you're going to start to build this walkable.
John, any comments on this?
If we all comment on everything,
That's okay. What I'd really like to know though is, from you, John, is have you seen in another community where it's really worked well?
in terms of walkability.
In Arlington, yeah, in terms of walkability, what would you say from your experiences, and it doesn't have to be the top, I'm just saying one, so some people may or may not be familiar with, they hear what Brian and Matt say, but in order to really experience or envision, is there a place they can go and see what it looks like and feels like?
Brian, help me out here. This would be a particular.
There's sections of Columbia Pike that are kind of transitioning from what was strip development to more residential over retail or corresponding with retail. I think there are sections.
Like Penrose?
Yeah.
So if you all are familiar or not, that's an example of, sorry, John?
You have to separate the road network from the development, but Clarendon is a very walkable
Yes,
community. It's not
absolutely.
necessarily the development will be necessarily be looking at on Lee Highway, but the grid and all that is a very walkable, the Clarendon-Wilson corridor or something like that. That would be.
Yeah. So just as a reference, if anybody wants to go out and do some exploring, it's always good to know what you guys, from your perspective, what you think is working. So let me ask you all what I think is a question that our community, not just this room, really wants